Welcome to the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. One of the basic factors of living in a university is that we have a library. And a library is the storehouse of our knowledge. Indeed, Karl Popper called it the World 3, where we store all the material that we can't afford to keep in our minds. And with me, we have the librarian who is responsible for the theology collections here in the university, Neil Smyth. Welcome, Neil.
Yeah, welcome.
And what I would like to discuss with you today is one particular aspect of the library's collections, the reference collection.
Okay, well, the reference collection really relates to all our other collections in the sense that students come to the university, particularly in the first year, and they're overwhelmed by this huge library collection that they've suddenly got access to. And they're being asked by people like you to prepare essays and assignments. And what they're sometimes doing is taking kind of a sporadic approach to their research strategy. They're finding they've got access to all these different materials, so they might be accessing quite obscure materials. But what they're not doing is building up their knowledge systematically. And that's where the reference collection really helps. So on level 4 of the Hallward Library, we have really important reference works, encyclopaedias, dictionaries, specialist materials for religion and theology. And by using those resources, students can build up their knowledge and have a better understanding of a subject area before they start using, say, a database like JSTOR to access more obscure materials, perhaps, that they might incorporate into their work.
In other words, you could often learn more from 20 minutes with an encyclopedia than from an hour reading a chapter in a book.
Yeah, I mean, a really good example, it was an area that you were working in, Eusebius of Caesarea. So we were looking at that as a topic area, and what some students were doing, they were going to Google as a starting point, or even those students who wanted to access quality information, they were searching JSTOR, and again, accessing materials that really they didn't quite understand. But by bringing them back to the reference resources, starting with something like the Encyclopedia of Religion, and in that case we have both a print and an electronic form, they can really put in place those building blocks then that set them up for seminar discussions and essays and so forth.
Let's take that as an example. You could go into Eusebius looking at the vast amount of writings that are done on the most technical parts of his work, because he was a very technical writer.
Yeah.
And all of those are, if the articles are in the journals, they're usually discussing debated points between scholars.
Yeah.
The books tend to be monographs, and again, they presuppose that you're way beyond the introductory level. Step 1 would be to use a 1-volume encyclopedia, say the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church.
Yeah.
Now there, you will only get 1 column of information, but you'll get the key ideas, the dates, what he wrote, where you find it. Next step.
Well, the next step then is going to a multi-volume work. So in the Hallward Library, we have that mix. So we have, say, multi-volume, specialist dictionaries, single volume dictionaries and single volume encyclopedias, but we also have those multi-volume works, and we have those in some examples on our shelves in the library. There are some examples that we only have in electronic form, but when students access them then, instead of say a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs of information, they might have something that looked more like an essay, or it was several pages. There would be a bibliography, so it would point them in the direction of further reading and so forth.
Moreover, encyclopedias started being produced in theology, 1400 years ago, but in published form they began in the 19th century. And actually looking at the reference works from today, a modern reference work, looking from a reference work from the 1970s and looking at one, say, from the 1930s, you can actually map in just the reference collection the evolution of scholarship.
Yeah.
And you can build a history of what's been happening.
Yeah, and in some cases now we'll have electronic resources where they'll show you that development in terms of the different editions. So rather than there are some examples in the library where we only have the latest edition. but some electronic resources will allow you to see that development, and that's partly how the digital environment is changing as well. But the other thing about the reference collection is really how it inspires students to think about how they might be the researchers of tomorrow. So they begin to understand their subject in a different way and begin to think about that process of change and creation, how some of them who are students, say undergraduate students now, in 10 years' time, they might be people who are creating the next version of these encyclopedias, the next stage in the development of our knowledge. And when you convey that to students in the first year, those students who you're able to reach, they genuinely find that inspiring. And it's a really important part of relating the library collection to the development of research.
When people are planning the layout of libraries, they always put the reference collection close to the door. And that means that students, and indeed many others, tend to walk past them thinking they're going to get to it.
Yeah.
They're going to get into the stacks where the real things are. But it's always worth remembering the idea of putting them at the door was that they were the keys to the library.
Yeah.
You come in the library, you go to the simplest works, more complex, and only when you've progressed through these great keys are you ready to go into the stacks.
Yeah, and it's often, when you look at the layout, it's not just close to the door, but also close to the inquiry desk and the office where the librarians are. That's really interesting, the position of our reference collection. It's in between those two spaces. So they're the places where students are most likely to come to us with an inquiry. And so I don't know about every subject that students might come to me with, but I'm sitting right next to a reference collection. So normally I can go out to an encyclopedia and I can start them off in their inquiries and how their investigations into whatever topic somebody like you has given them and sent them to the Hallwood Library to find out about. So it's really important, that layout, and how we're sitting there next to those physical collections and able to sometimes sit at our computers and access those electronic collections.
Neil, thank you for coming and introducing this most important aspect of the work of scholarship in a university library.
Thank you, Tom.